Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting: if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. The Calling. Chloe Saunders used to have a relatively normal life. But now she finds herself in the middle of some really strange situations because she suddenly starts seeing dead people. She gets locked up in a group home for unstable teens. The group home isn't what it seems. My name is Chloe Saunders and my life will never be the same again. All I wanted was to make friends, meet boys, and keep on being ordinary. I don't even know what that means anymore. It all started on the day that I saw my first ghost and the ghost saw me. Now there are ghosts everywhere and they won't leave me alone. To top it all off, I somehow got myself locked up in Lyle House, a special home for troubled teens. Yet the home isn't what it seems. Don't tell anyone, but I think there might be more to my housemates than meets the eye. The question is, whose side are they on? It's up to me to figure out the dangerous secrets behind Lyle House, before its skeletons come back to haunt me. Episode 1. 12 years earlier. Mommy forgot to warn the new babysitter about the basement. Chloe teetered on the top step, chubby hands reaching up to clutch both railings, her arms shaking so much she could barely hang on. Her legs shook, too, the Scooby-Doo heads on her slippers bobbing. Even her breath shook, puffing like she'd been running. Chloe. Emily's muffled voice drifted up from the dark basement. Your mom said the Coke's in the cold cellar, but I can't find it. Can you come down and help me? Mommy said she'd told Emily about the basement. Chloe was sure of it. She closed her eyes and thought hard. Before Mommy and Daddy left for the party, she'd been playing in the TV room. Mommy had called, and Chloe had run into the front hall where Mommy had scooped her up in a hug, laughing when Chloe's doll poked her eye. I see you're playing with Pirate Jasmine. Has she rescued poor Aladdin from the evil genie yet? Chloe shook her head, then whispered, Did you tell Emily about the basement? I most certainly did. No basements for Miss Chloe. That door stays closed. When Daddy came around the corner, Mommy said, We really need to talk about moving, Steve. Say the word and the sign goes up. Daddy ruffled Chloe's hair. Be good for Emily, kiddo. And then they were gone. Chloe, I know you can hear me, Emily yelled. Chloe peeled her fingers from the railing and stuck them in her ears. Chloe. I see Kenty go in the basement, Chloe called. I am not allowed. Well, I'm in charge and I say you are. You're a big girl. Chloe made her feet move down one step. The back of her throat hurt and everything looked fuzzy, like she was going to cry. Chloe Saunders, you have 5 seconds or I'll drag you down here and lock the door. Chloe raced down the steps so fast her feet tangled and she tumbled into a heap on the landing. She lay there, ankle throbbing, tears burning her eyes as she peered into the basement, with its creaks and smells and shadows. And Mrs. Hobb. There'd been others, before Mrs. Hobb scared them away. Like old Mrs. Miller, who'd play peekaboo with Chloe and call her Mary. And Mr. Drake, who'd ask weird questions, like whether anyone lived on the moon yet, and most times Chloe didn't know the answer, but he'd still smile and tell her she was a good girl. She used to like coming downstairs and talking to the people. All she had to do was not look behind the furnace, where a man hung from the ceiling, his face all purple and puffy. He never said anything, but seeing him always made Chloe's tummy hurt. "Chloe!" Emily's muffled voice called. "Are you coming?" Mommy would say, "Think about the good parts, not the bad." So as Chloe walked down the last 3 steps, she remembered Mrs. Miller and Mr. Drake, and she didn't think about Mrs. Hobb at all, or not very much. At the bottom, she squinted into the near darkness. Just the night lights were on, the ones Mommy had put everywhere when Chloe started saying she didn't want to go downstairs, and Mommy thought she was afraid of the dark, which she was, a little, but only because the dark meant Mrs. Hobb could sneak up on her. Chloe could see the cold cellar door, though, so she kept her eyes on that and walked as fast as she could. When something moved, she forgot about not looking, but it was only the hanging man, and all she could see was his hand peeking from behind the furnace as he swayed. She ran to the cold cellar door and yanked it open. Inside, it was pitch black. "Chloe!" Emily called from the darkness. Chloe clenched her fists. Now Emily was being really mean. Hiding on her. Footsteps pattered overhead. "Mommy? Home already? Come on, Chloe. You aren't afraid of the dark, are you?" Emily laughed. "I guess you're still a little baby after all." Chloe scowled. Emily didn't know anything. Just a stupid, mean girl. Chloe would get her Coke, then run upstairs and tell Mommy, and Emily would never babysit her again. She leaned into the tiny room, trying to remember where Mommy kept the Coke. That was it on the shelf, wasn't it? She darted over and stood on her tiptoes. Her fingers closed around a cool metal can. "Chloe? Chloe?" It was Emily's voice, but far away, shrill. Footsteps pounded across the floor overhead. "Chloe, where are you?" Chloe dropped the can. It hit the concrete with a crack, then rolled against her foot, hissing and spitting, soda pooling around her slippers. "Chloe, Chloe, where are you?" mimicked a voice behind her, like Emily's, but not quite. Chloe turned slowly. In the doorway stood an old woman in a pink housecoat, her eyes and teeth glittering in the dark. "Mrs. Hobb." Chloe wanted to squeeze her eyes shut, but she didn't dare because it only made her madder, made everything worse. Mrs. Hobb's skin rippled and squirmed. Then it went black and shiny, crackling like twigs in a campfire. Big chunks fell off, plopping onto the floor. Her hair sizzled and burned away. And then there was nothing left but a skull dotted with scraps of blackened flesh. The jaws opened, the teeth still glittering. "Welcome back, Chloe." 1. I bolted up in bed, one hand clutching my pendant, the other wrapped in my sheets. I struggled to recapture wisps of the dream already fluttering away. Something about a basement, a little girl, me? I couldn't remember ever having a basement. We'd always lived in condo apartments. A little girl in a basement, something scary. Weren't basements always scary? One shivered just thinking about them, dark and damp and empty. But this one hadn't been empty. There'd been. I couldn't remember what. A man behind a furnace? A bang at my bedroom door made me jump. "Chloe!" Annette shrieked. Why hasn't your alarm gone off? I'm the housekeeper, not your nanny. If you're late again, I'm calling your father. As threats went, this wasn't exactly the stuff of nightmares. Even if Annette managed to get hold of my dad in Berlin, he'd just pretend to listen, eyes on his BlackBerry, attention riveted to something more important, like the weather forecast. He'd murmur a vague yes, I'll see to it when I get back, and forget all about me the moment he hung up. I turned on my radio, cranked it up, and crawled out of bed. A half hour later, I was in my bathroom, getting ready for school. I pulled the sides of my hair back in clips, glanced in the mirror, and shuddered. The style made me look 12 years old, and I didn't need any help. I'd just turned 15 and servers still handed me the kiddie menu in restaurants. I couldn't blame them. I was 5'0" with curves that only showed if I wore tight jeans and a tighter t-shirt. Aunt Lauren swore I'd shoot up and out when I finally got my period. By this point, I figured it was if, not when. Most of my friends had gotten theirs at 12, 11 even. I tried not to think about it too much, but of course I did. I worried that there was something wrong with me, felt like a freak every time my friends talked about their periods, prayed they didn't find out I hadn't gotten mine. Aunt Lauren said I was fine, and she was a doctor, so I guess she'd know. Chloe. The door shuddered under Annette's meaty fist. I'm on the toilet, I shouted back. Can I get some privacy maybe? I tried just one clip at the back of my head, holding the sides up. Not bad. When I turned my head for a side view, the clip slid from my baby fine hair. I never should have gotten it cut. But I'd been sick of having long, straight, little girl hair. I'd decided on a shoulder length, wispy style. On the model it looked great. On me? Not so much. I eyed the unopened hair color tube. Carrie swore red streaks would be perfect in my strawberry blonde hair. I couldn't help thinking I'd look like a candy cane. Still, it might make me look older. I'm picking up the phone, Chloe, Annette yelled. I grabbed the tube of dye, stuffed it in my backpack, and threw open the door. I took the stairs, as always. The building might change, but my routine never did. The day I'd started kindergarten, my mother held my hand, my Sailor Moon backpack over her other arm as we'd stood at the top of the landing. Get ready, Chloe, she'd said. 1, 2, 3. And we were off, racing down the stairs until we reached the bottom, panting and giggling, the floor swaying and sliding under our unsteady feet, all the fears over my first school day gone. We'd run down the stairs together every morning all through kindergarten and half of first grade, and then, well, then there wasn't anyone to run down the stairs with anymore. I paused at the bottom, touching the necklace under my t-shirt, then shook off the memories, hoisted my backpack, and walked from the stairwell. After my mom died, we'd moved around Buffalo a lot. My dad flipped luxury apartments, meaning he bought them in buildings in the final stages of construction, then sold them when the work was complete. Since he was away on business most of the time, putting down roots wasn't important. Not for him, anyway. This morning, the stairs hadn't been such a bright idea. My stomach was already fluttering with nerves over my Spanish midterm. I'd screwed up the last test, gone to a weekend sleepover at Beth's when I should have been studying, and barely passed. Spanish had never been my best subject, but if I didn't pull it up to AC, Dad might actually notice and start wondering whether an art school had been such a smart choice. Milos was waiting for me in his cab at the curb. He'd been driving me for 2 years now, through 2 moves and 3 schools. As I got in, he adjusted the visor on my side. The morning sun still hit my eyes, but I didn't tell him that. My stomach relaxed as I rubbed my fingers over the familiar rip in the armrest and inhaled chemical pine from the air freshener twisting above the vent. "I saw a movie last night," he said as he slid the cab across 3 lanes. "One of the kind you like? A thriller?" "No," he frowned, lips moving as if testing out word choices. "An action-adventure. You know, lots of guns, things blowing up. A real shoot-'em-down movie." I hated correcting Milos's English, but he insisted on it. "You mean, a shoot-'em-up movie?" He cocked one dark brow. "When you shoot a man, which way does he fall?" "Up." I laughed, and we talked about movies for a while. My favorite subject. When Milos had to take a call from his dispatcher, I glanced out the side window. A long-haired boy darted from behind a cluster of businessmen. He carried an old-fashioned plastic lunch box with a superhero on it. I was so busy trying to figure out which superhero it was, I didn't notice where the boy was headed until he leaped off the curb, landing between us and the next car. "Milos!" I screamed. "Watch!" The last word was ripped from my lungs as I slammed against my shoulder belt. The driver behind us, and the one behind him, laid on their horns, a chain reaction of protest. "What?" Milos said. "Chloe? What's wrong?" I looked over the hood of the car and saw nothing. Just an empty lane in front and traffic veering to our left, drivers flashing Milos the finger as they passed. THTHTH, I clenched my fists, as if that could somehow force the word out. "If you get jammed, take another route," my speech therapist always said. "I thought I saw some wah-wah." "Speak slowly. Consider your words first." "I'm sorry. I thought I saw someone jump in front of us." Milos eased the taxi forward. "That happens to me sometimes, especially if I'm turning my head. I think I see someone, but there's no one there." I nodded. My stomach hurt again. 2. Between the dream I couldn't remember and the boy I couldn't have seen, I was spooked. Until I got at least one question out of my head, focusing on my Spanish test was out of the question. So I called Aunt Lauren. When I got her voicemail, I said I'd phone back at lunch. I was halfway to my friend Kari's locker when my aunt called back. "Did I ever live in a house with a basement?" I asked. "And good morning to you, too. Sorry. I had this dream." I told her what bits I could recall. "Ah, that would have been the old house in Allentown. You were just a tyke. I'm not surprised you don't remember." "Thanks. I can tell. Must have been a doozy of a nightmare. Something about a monster living in the basement. Very cliché. I'm ashamed of myself." "Monster? What?" The pause system on her end cut her off, a tinny voice saying, "Dr. Fellows, please report to Station 3B. "That'd be your cue," I said. "It can wait. Is everything okay, Chloe?" You sound off. No, just, my imagination's in overdrive today. I freaked Milos out this morning, thinking I saw a boy run in front of the cab. What? There wasn't a boy. Not outside my head, anyway. I saw Carrie at her locker and waved. The bell's going to ring, so I'm picking you up after school. High tea at the Crown. We'll talk. The line went dead before I could argue. I shook my head and ran to catch up with Carrie. School. Not much to say about it. People think art schools must be different, all that creative energy simmering, classes full of happy kids, even the goths as close to happy as their tortured souls will allow. They figure art schools must have less peer pressure and bullying. After all, most kids there are the ones who get bullied in other schools. It's true that stuff like that isn't bad at A.R. Gurney High, but when you put kids together, no matter how similar they seem, lines are drawn. Cliques form. Instead of jocks and geeks and nobodies, you get artists and musicians and actors. As a theater arts student, I was lumped in with the actors, where talent seemed to count less than looks, poise, and verbal ability. I didn't turn heads, and I scored a fat 0 on the last two. On a popularity scale, I ranked a perfectly mediocre 5. The kind of girl nobody thinks a whole lot about. But I'd always dreamed of being in art school, and it was as cool as I'd imagined. Better yet, my father had promised that I could stay until I graduated, no matter how many times we moved. That meant for the first time in my life, I wasn't the new girl. I'd started at A.R. Gurney as a freshman, like everyone else. Just like a normal kid. Finally. That day, though, I didn't feel normal. I spent the morning thinking about that boy on the street. There were plenty of logical explanations. I'd been staring at his lunchbox, so I'd misjudged where he'd been running. He'd jumped into a waiting car at the curb. Or swerved at the last second and vanished into the crowd. That made perfect sense. So why did it still bug me? Oh, come on, Miranda said as I rooted through my locker at lunchtime. He's right there. Ask him if he's going to the dance. How tough can that be? Leave her alone, Beth said. She reached over my shoulder, grabbed my bright yellow lunch bag from the top shelf, and dangled it. Don't know how you can miss this, Chloe. It's practically neon. She needs a stepladder to see that high, Carrie said. I banged her with my hip, and she bounced away, laughing. Beth rolled her eyes. Come on, people, or we'll never get a table. We made it as far as Brent's locker before Miranda elbowed me. Ask him, Chloe. She mock whispered it. Brent glanced over, then quickly looked away. My face heated and I clutched my lunch bag to my chest. Kari's long, dark hair brushed my shoulder. He's a jerk, she whispered. Ignore him. No, he's not a jerk. He just doesn't like me. Can't help that. Here, Miranda said. I'll ask him for you. No. I grabbed her arm. Please. Her round face screwed up in disgust. God, you can be such a baby. You're 15, Chloe. You have to take matters into your own hands. Like phoning a guy until his mother tells you to leave him alone. Carrie said. Miranda only shrugged. That's Rob's mother. He never said it. Yet? You just keep telling yourself that. That set them off for real. Normally, I'd have jumped in and made them quit, but I was still upset over Miranda's embarrassing me in front of Brent. Carrie, Beth, and I used to talk about guys, but we weren't totally into them. Miranda was she'd had more boyfriends than she could name. So when she started hanging with us, it suddenly became really important to have a guy we liked. I worried enough about being immature, and it didn't help that she'd burst out laughing when I'd admitted I'd never been on a real date. So I invented a crush. Brent. I figured I could just name a guy I liked and that would be enough. Not a chance. Miranda had outed me telling him I liked him. I'd been horrified. Well, mostly. There'd also been a little part of me that hoped he'd go cool. I really like Chloe, too. Not a chance. Before, we used to talk in Spanish class sometimes. Now he sat 2 rows away, like I'd suddenly developed the world's worst case of beau. We'd just reached the cafeteria when someone called my name. I turned to see Nate Bozian jogging toward me, his red hair like a beacon in the crowded hall. He bumped into a senior, grinned an apology, and kept coming. "Hey," I said as he drew near. "Hey yourself. Did you forget Petrie rescheduled film club for lunchtime this week? We're discussing avant-garde. I know you love art films." I fake gagged. "I'll send your regrets, then. And I'll tell Petrie you aren't interested in directing that short either. We're deciding that today." Nate started walking backward. "Maybe. Maybe not. So I'll tell Petrie." "Gotta run," I said to my friends and hurried to catch up with him. The film club meeting started backstage as always, where we'd go through business stuff and eat lunch. Food wasn't allowed in the auditorium. We discussed the short, and I was on the list for directors, the only freshman who'd made the cut. After, as everyone else watched scenes from avant-garde films, I mulled through my options for an audition tape. I snuck out before it ended and headed back to my locker. My brain kept whirring until I was halfway there. Then my stomach started acting up again, reminding me that I'd been so excited about making the short list that I'd forgotten to eat. I'd left my lunch bag backstage. I checked my watch. 10 minutes before class. I could make it. Film club had ended. Whoever left the auditorium last had turned out the lights, and I didn't have a clue how to turn them on, especially when finding the switch would require being able to see it. Glow-in-the-dark light switches. That's how I'd finance my first film. Of course, I'd need someone to actually make them. Like most directors, I was more of an idea person. I picked my way through the aisles, bashing my knees twice. Finally my eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lights, and I found the stairs leading backstage. Then it got tougher. The backstage dissolved into smaller areas curtained off for storage and makeshift dressing rooms. There were lights, but someone else had always turned them on. After feeling around the nearest wall and not finding a switch, I gave up. The faint glow of more emergency lights let me see shapes. Good enough. Still, it was pretty dark. I'm afraid of the dark. I had some bad experiences as a child, imaginary friends who lurked in dark places and scared me. I know that sounds weird. Other kids dream up playmates, I imagined bogeymen. The smell of grease paint told me I was in the dressing area, but the scent, mingled with the unmistakable odor of mothballs and old costumes, didn't calm me the way it usually did. 3 more steps and I did let out a shriek as fabric billowed around me. I'd stumbled into a curtain. Great! Exactly how loud had I screamed? I really hoped these walls were soundproof. I swept my hand over the scratchy polyester until I found the opening and parted the curtains. Ahead, I could make out the lunch table. Something yellow sat on the top. My bag? The makeshift hall seemed to stretch before me, yawning into darkness. It was the perspective, the 2 curtain sides angled inward, so the hall narrowed. Interesting illusion, especially for a suspense film. I'd have to remember that. Thinking about the corridor as a movie set calmed my nerves. I framed the shot, the bounce of my step adding a jerkiness that would make the scene more immediate, putting the viewer in the head of our protagonist, the foolish girl making her way toward the strange noise. Something thumped. I started, and my shoes squeaked, and that noise made me jump higher. I rubbed the goosebumps on my arms and tried to laugh. Okay, I did say strange noise, didn't I? Cue the sound effects, please. Another noise. A rustling. So we had rats in our spooky corridor, did we? How cliched. Time to turn off my galloping imagination and focus. Direct the scene. Our protagonist sees something at the end of the corridor. A shadowy figure. Oh, please. Talk about cheap thrills. Go for original, mysterious. Take 2. What's that she sees? A child's lunch bag, bright yellow and new, out of place in this old, condemned house. Keep the film rolling. Don't let my mind wander. A sob echoed through the silent rooms, then broke off, dissolving into a wet snuffling. Crying. Right. From my movie. The protagonist sees a child's lunch bag, then hears eerie sobs. Something moved at the end of the hall. A dark shape. I flung myself forward, racing for my bag. I grabbed it and took off. 3. Chloe. Hold up. I'd just dumped my uneaten lunch in my locker and was walking away when Nate hailed me. I turned to see him edging sideways through a group of girls. The bell sounded and the hall erupted, kids jostling like salmon fighting their way upstream, carrying along anything in their path. Nate had to struggle to reach me. You took off from film club before I could grab you. I wanted to ask if you're going to the dance. Tomorrow? Yeah. He flashed a dimpled grin. Great. See you there. A swarm of kids engulfed him. I stood there, staring after him. Had Nate just tracked me down to ask if I was going to the dance? It wasn't the same as asking me to the dance, but still. I was definitely going to need to rethink my outfit. A senior whacked into me, knocking off my backpack and muttering something about standing in the middle of the hall. As I bent to grab my bag, I felt a gush between my legs. I snapped upright and stood frozen before taking a tentative step. Oh God! Had I actually wet myself? I took a deep breath. Maybe I was sick. My stomach had been dancing all day. See if you can clean up, and if it's bad, take a cab home. In the bathroom, I pulled down my pants and saw bright red. For a couple of minutes, I just sat there, on the toilet, grinning and hoping that the rumor about school bathroom cams wasn't true. I balled up toilet paper in my panties, pulled up my jeans, and waddled out of the stall. And there it was, a sight that had mocked me since fall, the sanitary napkin dispenser. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, a 10, and 2 pennies. Back into the stall. Scavenged through my backpack. Find, 1 nickel. I eyed the machine. Drew closer. Examined the scratched lock, the one Beth said could be opened with a long fingernail. Mine weren't long, but my house key worked just fine. A banner week for me. Getting shortlisted for the director's spot. Nate asking me about the dance. My first period. And now my first criminal act. After I fixed myself up, I dug into my backpack for my brush and emerged instead with the tube of hair color. I lifted it. My reflection in the mirror grinned back. Why not add first skipped class and first dye job to the list? Coloring my hair at the school bathroom sink wouldn't be easy, but it would probably be simpler than at home, with the net hovering. Dyeing a dozen bright red streaks took 20 minutes. I'd had to take off my shirt to avoid getting dye on it, so I was standing over the sink in my bra and jeans. Luckily no one came in. I finished squeezing the strands dry with paper towel, took a deep breath, looked, and smiled. Carrie had been right. It did look good. Annette would freak. My dad might notice. Might even get mad. But I was pretty sure no one was going to hand me a 12 and under menu anymore. The door creaked. I shoved the towels in the trash, grabbed my shirt, and dashed into a stall. I barely had time to latch the door before the other girl started crying. I glanced over and saw a pair of Reeboks in the next stall. Should I ask whether she was okay? Or would that embarrass her? The toilet flushed and the shadow at my feet shifted. The stall lock clicked open. When the taps started, though, her sobs got even louder. The water shut off. The towel roll squeaked. Paper crumpled. The door opened. It shut. The crying continued. A cold finger slid down my spine. I told myself she'd changed her mind, and was staying until she got things under control, but the crying was right beside me. In the next stall. I squeezed my hands into fists. It was just my imagination. I slowly bent. No shoes under the divider. I ducked farther. No shoes in any of the stalls. The crying stopped. I yanked my shirt on and hurried from the bathroom before it could start again. As the door shut behind me, all went silent. An empty hall. I spun to see a custodian walking toward me, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The bathroom, I said. I was using the bathroom. He kept coming. I didn't recognize him. He was maybe my dad's age, with a brush cut, wearing our school janitorial uniform. A temp, filling in for Mr. Teitelbaum. I'm heading to C class now. I started walking. You. Get back here. I want to talk to you. The only other sound was my footsteps. My footsteps. Why couldn't I hear his? I walked faster. A blur passed me. The air shimmered about 10 feet ahead, a figure taking form in a custodian's shirt and slacks. I wheeled and broke into a run. The man let out a snarl that echoed down the hall. A student rounded the corner, and we almost collided. I stammered an apology and glanced over my shoulder. The janitor was gone. I exhaled and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the blue uniform shirt was inches from my face. I looked up, and let out a shriek. He looked like a mannequin that had gotten too close to a fire. Face burned. Melted. One eye bulged, exposed. The other eye had slid down near his cheekbone, the whole cheek sagging, lips drooping, skin shiny and misshapen end. The twisted lips parted. Maybe now you'll pay attention to me. I ran headlong down the hall. As I flew past one classroom door, it opened. Chloe. A man's voice. I kept running. Talk to me, the horrible, garbled voice snarled, getting closer. Do you know how long I've been trapped here? I flew through the doors into the stairwell and headed up. Up? All the stupid heroines go up. I veered across the landing and hit the next set of stairs. The custodian limped up the flight below, fingers clutching the railing, melted fingers, bone peeking through. I barreled through the doors and raced along the main hall. Listen to me, you selfish brat. All I want is 5 minutes. I swerved into the nearest empty classroom and slammed the door. As I backed into the center of the room, the custodian stepped through the door. Right through it. That awful melted face was gone, and he was normal again. Is that better? Now will you stop screaming and talk to? I darted to the window and started looking for a way to open it, then saw how far down it was. At least 30 feet, onto pavement. Chloe. The door flew open. It was the vice principal, Ms. Waugh, with my math teacher, Mr. Travis, and a music teacher whose name I couldn't remember. Seeing me at the window, Ms. Waugh threw out her arms, blocking the two men. Chloe, she said, voice low. Honey, you need to step away from that window. I was just. Chloe. Confused, I glanced back toward the window. Mr. Travis shot past Ms. Waugh and tackled me. As we hit the floor, the air flew out of my lungs. Scrambling off, he accidentally kneed me in the stomach. I fell back, doubled over, wheezing. I opened my eyes to see the custodian standing over me. I screamed and tried to get up, but Mr. Travis and the music teacher held me down while Ms. Waugh babbled into a cell phone. The custodian leaned through Mr. Travis. Now will you talk to me, girl? Can't get away. I thrashed, kicking at the custodian, trying to pull away from the teachers. They only held me tighter. I vaguely heard Ms. Waugh calling that help was on the way. The custodian pushed his face into mine and it changed to that horrible melted mask, so close I was staring into his one bulging eye, almost out of its socket. I chomped down on my tongue so I wouldn't scream. Blood filled my mouth. The more I fought, the harder the teachers restrained me, twisting my arms, pain stabbing through me. Can't you see him? I shouted. He's right there. Please. Please, please, please. Get him away from me. Get him away. They wouldn't listen. I continued to struggle, to argue, but they held me still as the burned man taunted me. Finally, two men in uniforms hurried through the door. One helped the teachers restrain me while the other moved behind, out of my sight. Fingers tightened on my forearm. Then a needle prick. Ice slid through my veins. The room started to sway. The custodian faded, blinking in and out. "No," he yelled. "I need to speak to her. Don't you understand? She can hear me. I only want to." His voice faded as the paramedics lowered me onto a stretcher. It rose, swaying, like an elephant. I'd rode one once, with my mom, at the zoo, and my mind slipped back there, Mom's arms around me, her laughter. The custodian's howl of rage sliced through my memory. "Don't take her away. I need her." Swaying. The elephant swaying. Mom laughing. 4. I sat on the edge of my hospital bed and tried to persuade myself I was still asleep. That was the best explanation for what I was hearing. I could also chalk it up to delusional, but I preferred dreaming. Aunt Lauren sat beside me, holding my hand. My eyes went to the nurses gliding past in the corridor. She followed my gaze, rose, and shut the door. Through a glaze of tears, I watched her and pictured Mom instead. Something inside me crumpled, and I was 6 years old, huddled on the bed, crying for my mother. I rubbed my hands over the covers, stiff and scratchy, catching at my dry skin. The room was so hot every breath made my parched throat tighten. Aunt Lauren handed me my water, and I wrapped my hands around the cool glass. The water had a metallic taste, but I gulped it down. "A group home," I said. The walls seemed to suck the words from my mouth, like a sound stage, absorbing them and leaving only dead air. "Oh God, Chloe!" She pulled a tissue from her pocket and wiped her nose. "Do you know how many times I've had to tell a patient he's dying? And somehow, this seems harder." She shifted to face me. "I know how badly you want to go to UCLA for college. This is the only way we're going to get you there, hon. Is it, Dad?" She paused, and I knew she'd like to blame him. She'd wanted to raise me after my mom passed away, spare me a life of housekeepers and empty apartments. She'd never forgiven my father for refusing. Just like she'd never forgiven him for that night my mother died. It didn't matter that they'd been sideswiped in a hit-and-run he'd been driving, so she held him responsible. "No," she said finally. "It's the school. Unless you spend 2 weeks undergoing evaluation in a group home, it will go on your permanent record." "What will go on my record?" Her fist clenched around the tissue. "It's that she caught herself. It's the zero-tolerance policy." She spit the words with more venom than the curse. "Zero tolerance? You mean violence?" But I didn't. I know you didn't. But to them, it's simple. You struggled with a teacher. You need help. In a home. For crazy kids. I awoke several times that night. The second time, my father was in the doorway, watching me. The third, he was sitting beside my bed. Seeing my eyes open, he reached over and awkwardly patted my hand. "It's going to be all right," he murmured. "Everything will be all right." I fell back to sleep. My father was still there the next morning. His eyes were bleary, the wrinkles around his mouth deeper than I remembered. He'd been up all night, flying back from Berlin. I don't think Dad ever wanted kids. But he'd never tell me that, even in anger. Whatever Aunt Lauren thinks of him, he does his best. He just doesn't seem to know what to make of me. I'm like a puppy left to him by someone he loved very much, and he struggles to do right by it even if he isn't much of a dog person. "You changed your hair," he said as I sat up. I braced myself. "When you run screaming through the school halls after dyeing your hair in the girls' bathroom, the first thing people say, well, after they get past the screaming through the halls part, is you were doing what? Coloring your hair in a school bathroom isn't normal. Not for girls like me. And bright red streaks? While skipping class. It screams mental breakdown." "Do you like it?" my father asked after a moment. I nodded. He paused, then let out a strained chuckle. "Well, it's not exactly what I would have chosen, but it looks all right. If you like it, that's what counts." He scratched his throat, peppered with beard shadow. "I guess your Aunt Lauren told you about this group home business. She's found one she thinks will be okay. Small, private. Can't say I'm thrilled with the idea, but it's only for a couple of weeks. No one would say what was wrong with me. They had me talk to a bunch of doctors and they ran some tests, and I could tell they had a good idea what was wrong and just wouldn't say it. That meant it was bad. This wasn't the first time I'd seen people who weren't really there. That's what Aunt Lauren had wanted to talk to me about after school. When I'd mentioned the dream, she'd remembered how I used to talk about people in our old basement. My parents figured it was my creative version of make-believe friends, inventing a whole cast of characters. Then those friends started terrifying me, so much that we'd moved. Even after that, I'd sometimes seen people, so my mom bought me my ruby necklace and said it would protect me. Dad said it was all about psychology. I'd believed it worked, so it had. But now, it was happening again. And this time, no one was chalking it up to an overactive imagination. They were sending me to a home for crazy kids. They thought I was crazy. I wasn't. I was 15 and had finally gotten my period, and that had to count for something. It couldn't just be coincidence that I'd started seeing things the same day. All those stockpiled hormones had exploded and my brain misfired, plucking images from forgotten movies and tricking me into thinking they were real. If I was crazy, I'd be doing more than seeing and hearing people who weren't there. I'd be acting crazy, and I wasn't. Was I? The more I thought about it, the more I wasn't sure. I felt normal. I couldn't remember doing anything weird. Except for dyeing my hair in the bathroom. And skipping class. And breaking into the napkin dispenser. And fighting with a teacher. That last one didn't count. I'd been freaked out from seeing that burned guy and I'd been struggling to get away from him, not trying to hurt anyone. Before that, I'd been fine. My friends had thought I was fine. Mr. Petrie thought I was fine when he put me on the director's short list. Nate Bozian obviously thought I was fine. You wouldn't be happy that a crazy girl was going to a dance. He had been happy, hadn't he? When I thought back, it all seemed fuzzy, like some distant memory that maybe I only dreamed. What if none of that happened? I'd wanted the director spot. I'd wanted Nate to be interested in me. Maybe I'd imagined it all. Hallucinated it, like the boy on the street and the crying girl and the burned janitor. If I was crazy, would I know it? That's what being crazy was, wasn't it? You thought you were fine. Everyone else knew better. Maybe I was crazy. My father and Aunt Lauren drove me to Lyle House on Sunday afternoon. They'd given me some medicine before I left the hospital and it made me sleepy. Our arrival was a montage of still shots and clips. A huge white Victorian house perched on an oversized lot. Yellow trim. A swing on the wraparound porch. 2 women. The first, gray-haired and wide-hipped, coming forward to greet me. The younger one's dour eyes following me, her arms crossed, braced for trouble. Walking up a long narrow flight of stairs. The older woman a nurse, who introduced herself as Mrs. Talbot, chirping a guided tour that my fuzzy brain couldn't follow. A bedroom, white and yellow, decorated with daisies, smelling of hair gel. On the far side of the room, a twin bed with a quilt yanked over the bunched-up sheets. The walls over the bed decorated with pages ripped from teen magazines. The dresser covered with makeup tubes and bottles. Only the tiny desk bare. My side of the room was a sterile mirror image, same bed, same dresser, same tiny desk, all wiped clean of personality. Time for Dad and Aunt Lauren to go. Mrs. Talbot explained I wouldn't see them for a couple of days because I needed time to acclimate to my new environment. Like a pet in a new home. Hugging Aunt Lauren. Pretending I didn't see the tears in her eyes. An awkward embrace from Dad. He mumbled that he'd stay in town, and he would come to visit as soon as they let him. Then he pressed a roll of 20s into my hand as he kissed the top of my head. Mrs. Talbot telling me they'd put my things away, since I was probably tired. Just crawl into bed. The blind closing. Room going dark. Falling back to sleep. My father's voice waking me. Room completely dark now, black outside. Night. Dad silhouetted in the doorway. The younger nurse Miss Van Dop behind him, face set in disapproval. My father moving to my bedside and pressing something soft into my arms. We forgot Ozzy. I wasn't sure you'd sleep without him. The koala bear had been on a shelf in my room for 2 years, banished from my bed when I'd outgrown him. But I took him and buried my nose in his ratty fake fur that smelled of home. I awoke to the wheezy sleep breathing of the girl in the next bed. I looked over but saw only a form under the quilt. As I turned onto my back, hot tears slid down my cheeks. Not homesickness. Shame. Embarrassment. Humiliation. I'd scared Aunt Lauren and Dad. They'd had to scramble to figure out what to do with me. What was wrong with me? How to fix it? And school. My cheeks burned hotter than my tears. How many kids had heard me screaming? Peeked in that classroom while I'd been fighting the teachers and babbling about being chased by melted custodians. Seen me being taken away strapped to a stretcher. Anyone who'd missed the drama would have heard about it. Everyone would know that Chloe Saunders had lost it. That she was nuts, crazy, locked up with the rest of the loonies. Even if they let me return to school, I didn't think I'd ever have the guts to go back. 5. I woke to the clink-clink of metal hangers. A blonde girl flipped through clothes that I was pretty sure were mine, hung up yesterday by Mrs. Talbot. "Hello," I said. She turned and smiled. "Nice stuff. Good labels. I'm Chloe." "Liz. Like Lizzie McGuire." She waved at an old and faded magazine cutout on her wall. "Except, I don't go by Lizzie, 'cause I think it sounds kind of." She lowered her voice, as if not to offend the picture Lizzie babyish. She continued talking, but I didn't hear it because all I could think was, what's wrong with her? If she was at Lyle House, there was something wrong with her. Some mental condition. She didn't look crazy. Her long hair was brushed into a gleaming ponytail. She wore Guess jeans and a Gap t-shirt. If I didn't know better, I'd think I'd woken up in a boarding school. She kept talking. Maybe that was a sign. She seemed harmless enough, though. She'd have to be, wouldn't she? They wouldn't put anyone dangerous in here. Or really crazy. Oh no, Chloe. They don't put any really crazy people in here. Just the ones who hear voices and see burned up janitors and fight with teachers. My stomach started to ache. "Come on," she said. "Breakfast's in 5 minutes, and they get real snippy if you're late." Liz put out a hand as I opened a dresser drawer. "You can wear your pajamas down to breakfast. The guys eat lunch and dinner with us, but they have breakfast later, so we get some privacy." "Guys?" "Simon, Derek, and Peter. The house is co-ed." "Uh-huh." She pursed her lips in the mirror and picked off a dry flake. "We all share the bottom floor, but the top one is divided." She leaned out the door and showed me how short the hall was. "They get the other side. There's not even a joining door. Like we'd sneak over there at night if we could." She giggled. "Well, Tori would. And I might, if there was someone worth sneaking over for. Tori has dibs on Simon." She scrutinized me in the mirror. "You might like Peter. He's cute but way too young for me. He's 13. Almost 14, I think. I'm 15. She bit her lip. "Oh, geez. Anyway, Peter won't be around much longer. I heard he's going home soon." She paused. 15, hey? What grade?" "9th. Same as Tori. I'm in 10th, like Simon, Derek, and Ray. I think Simon and Ray are still 15, though. And did I say I love your hair? I wanted to do that, with blue streaks, but my mom said." Liz kept up the commentary as we headed downstairs, moving on to the whole cast of characters. There was Dr. Gill, the psychologist, but she only came for her office hours, as did the tutor, Ms. Wong. I'd met 2 of the 3 nurses. Mrs. Talbot, the older woman, whom Liz proclaimed really nice, and the younger Miss Van Dop, who was, she whispered, not so nice. The 3rd nurse, Mrs. Abdo, worked weekends, giving the others each a day off. They lived in and looked after us. They sounded more like the house mothers I'd heard boarding school kids talk about, but Liz called them nurses. At the bottom of the stairs, the overpowering stink of lemon cleaner hit me. It smelled like Gran's house. Even Dad never seemed comfortable in his mother's immaculate house, under the glare that said you'd better not expect any birthday money if you spilled your soda on the white leather sofa. One look in this living room, though, and I breathed a sigh of relief. It was as clean as Gran's, the carpet spotless, the wood gleaming, but it had a worn, comfortable look that invited you to curl up on the sofa. It was also painted the favored color for Lyle House, a pale yellow this time. Pillows covered the dark blue sofa and 2 rocking chairs. An old grandfather clock ticked in the corner. Every end table held a vase of daisies or daffodils. Bright and cheerful. Too bright and cheerful, really, like this bed and breakfast near Syracuse where Aunt Lauren and I stayed last fall, so desperate to be homey that it seemed more a stage set than someone's house. No different from this, I guess. A business eager to convince you it wasn't a business, to make you feel at home. To make you forget you were in a place for crazy kids. Liz stopped me outside the dining room so we could peek in. On one side of the table sat a tall girl with short dark hair. That's Tori. Victoria, but she likes Tori. With an I. She's my best friend. She gets moody, and I've heard that's why she's here, but I think she's fine. She jerked her chin toward the other person at the table, a pretty, copper-skinned girl with long dark curls. That's Rachel. Ray. She has this thing for fire. I stared at the girl. Thing for fire? Did that mean she set fires? I thought this place was supposed to be safe. What about the boys? Were any of them violent? I rubbed my stomach. Someone's hungry, I see, chirped a voice. I glanced up to see Mrs. Talbot coming through what I guessed was the kitchen door, milk pitcher in hand. She smiled at me. Come in, Chloe. Let me introduce you. Before breakfast, Miss Van Dop gave us all pills, then watched as we took them. It was creepy. No one said a word, just held out their hands, gulped their pill down with water, and returned to their conversations. When I stared at mine, Miss Van Dop said the doctor would explain everything later, but for now, I should just take it. So I did. After we'd eaten, we trooped upstairs to dress. Ray was in the lead, followed by Liz and Tori. Then me. Rachel. Tori called. Ray's shoulders tightened and she didn't turn. Yes, Victoria. Tori climbed 2 more steps, closing the gap between them. You did get the laundry done, right? It's your turn, and I want to wear that new shirt my mom bought me. Ray slowly turned. Mrs. T said I could do laundry today, since we had to take off, while her gaze lit on me, and she offered a tiny, almost apologetic smile. Chloe got settled. So you didn't do the laundry? That's what I said. But I want your shirt. Got that part. So wear it. It's brand new. Yeah, and other people probably tried it on. That's gross. Ray threw up her hands and disappeared down the hall. Tori shot a scowl over her shoulder, as if this were my fault. As she turned, something flashed between us, and I stumbled back a step, grabbing the railing. Her scowl twisted. Geez, I'm not going to hit you. Over her shoulder, a hand appeared, pale fingers wriggling like worms. Chloe. Liz said. I peeled my gaze from the disembodied hand. It tripped. Listen girl, a man's voice whispered in my ear. Liz came down the 2 steps between us and laid her fingers on my arm. Are you okay? You're all white. I just thought I heard something. Why is she talking like that? Tori asked Liz. It's called a stutter. Liz squeezed my arm. It's okay. My brother stutters, too. Your brother is 5, Liz. Lots of little kids do it. Not teenagers. Tori peered down at me. Are you slow? What? You know, do you ride the Lutung bus? She pulled her hands apart, then brought them together again, or the short one. Liz flushed. Tori, that's not. Well, she talks like a little kid, and she looks like one, so. I have a speech impediment, I said, enunciating carefully, as if she were the slow one. I'm working to overcome it. You're doing great, Liz chirped. You said that whole sentence without stuttering. Girls? Mrs. Talbot peered around the hall doorway below. You know you aren't supposed to fool around on the stairs. Someone could get hurt. Class is in 10 minutes. Chloe, we're still waiting for notes from your teachers, so you won't be in class today. When you're dressed, we'll discuss your schedule. Lyle House likes schedules the way a boot camp likes discipline. We rose at 7:30. Ate, showered, dressed, and were in class by 9 o'clock, where we did independent work assigned by our regular teachers, supervised by the tutor, Ms. Wong. Break at 10:30 for a snack, nutritious, of course. Back to class. Break for lunch at noon. Back to class from 1 o'clock until 4:30 with a 20-minute break at 2:30. At some point during classes the timing would vary. We'd have our individual hour-long therapy session with Dr. Gill. My first would be after lunch today. From 4:30 until 6 o'clock, we had free time, kind of. In addition to classes and therapy, we had chores. A lot of chores from the looks of the list. These had to be done during our free time before and after dinner. Plus we had to squeeze in 30 minutes of physical activity every day. Then after a snack, it was off to bed at 9 o'clock, lights out at 10 o'clock. Nutritious snacks? Therapy sessions? Chore lists? Mandatory exercises? 9 o'clock bedtime? Boot camp was starting to look good. I didn't belong here. I really didn't. After our talk, a phone call sent Mrs. Talbot scurrying off, calling back promises to return with my job list. Oh joy! I sat in the living room trying to think, but the unrelenting cheerfulness was like a bright light shining in my eyes, making it hard to concentrate. A few days of yellow paint and daisies and I'd turn into a happy zombie, like Liz. I felt a pang of shame. Liz had made me feel welcome and been quick to defend me against her friend. If being cheerful was a mental illness, it wasn't such a bad one to have, certainly better than seeing burned up people. I rubbed the back of my neck and closed my eyes. Lyle House wasn't so bad, really. Better than padded rooms and endless hallways filled with real zombies, shambling mental patients so doped up they couldn't be bothered to get dressed, much less bathe. Maybe it was the illusion of home that bothered me. Maybe, in some ways, I'd be happier with ugly couches and white walls and bars on the windows, so there'd be no false promises. Yet just because I couldn't see any bars didn't mean it was as open as it seemed. It couldn't be. I walked to the front window. Closed, despite the sunny day. There was a hole where there'd probably been a latch for opening it. I looked out. Lots of trees, a quiet street, more older houses on big lots. No electric fences. No sign on the lawn proclaiming Lyle House for crazy kids. All very ordinary, but I suspected if I grabbed a chair and smashed the window, an alarm would sound. So where was the alarm? I stepped into the hall, glanced at the front door, and saw it, blinking away. No attempt to hide it. A reminder, I guess. This might look like your house, but don't try walking out the front door. What about the back? I went into the dining room and looked out the window into a large yard with as many trees as the front. There was a shed, lawn chairs, and gardens. The soccer ball on one wooden chair and the basketball hoop over a cement pad suggested we were allowed out probably for that 30 minutes of physical activity. Was it monitored? I couldn't see any cameras, but there were enough windows for the nurses to keep an eye on anyone in the yard. And the 6-foot-high fence was a good deterrent. Looking for a way out. I spun to see Miss Van Dop. Her eyes glittered with what looked like amusement, but her face was solemn. And no. I was just looking around. Oh, and while I was getting dressed, I noticed I don't have my necklace. I think I might have left it in the hospital, and I want to make sure I get it back. It's kind of special. I'll let your father know, but he'll have to hold it for you while you're here. We don't like our girls wearing jewelry. Now, as for looking around. In other words, nice try on the distraction, but it hadn't worked. She pulled out a dining room chair and motioned for me to sit. I did. I'm sure you saw the security system at the front door, she said. I wasn't trying to escape. I know. The smile touched her lips. Most of our residents aren't the sort of teenagers who run away from home, unless it's to make a statement. They're bright enough to know that whatever is out there is worse than what's in here. And what's in here isn't so bad. Not Disney World, but not prison either. The only escape attempts we've ever had are from kids trying to sneak out to meet friends. Hardly serious, but parents expect better security from us, and, while we pride ourselves on providing a home-like environment, I think it's important to point out the limits early. She waited as if for a response. I nodded. The windows are armed with a siren, as are the exterior doors. You are allowed out the back only, and there is no gate. Because of the alarm, you must notify us before going out, so we can disable it and, yes, watch you. If you have any questions about what you can and cannot do, come to me. I won't sugarcoat it for you, Chloe. I believe honesty is the first step to establishing trust, and trust is critical in a place like this. Again her gaze pierced mine, probing, making sure I understood the other side of that statement that honesty went both ways and I was expected to keep up my end. I nodded. 6. MRS. Talbot set me up to peel carrots for lunch. I didn't dare tell her I'd never peeled one in my life. After hacking my thumb, I got the hang of it. As I peeled, my mind started to wander, into places I'd rather not visit. So I called in my best defense, turn it all into a movie. As traumatic experiences went, the last few days were my best film fodder ever. But what genre would it be? Straight horror? Or psychological suspense? Maybe a combination of elements, surprising the viewer with peeling duty already, a voice whispered. What did you do to deserve that? This time, when I wheeled around, I didn't see a disembodied hand but a whole body. A guy, in fact, maybe a year older than me, a half-foot taller and slender, with high cheekbones and dark blonde hair worn in short, messy spikes. His almond-shaped brown eyes danced with amusement. You must be Chloe. He reached out. I jumped back. The carrot leaped from my hands and bounced off his arm. A real arm. Attached to a real guy. I. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed at the dining room door. Beyond it, Mrs. Talbot was talking to Liz. I'm not supposed to be in here, he whispered. I'm Simon, by the way. I was suddenly aware that he was standing between me and the exit. His smile was friendly, and he was definitely cute, but cute didn't count with a guy who had you cornered in a group home. He backed up to the walk-in pantry, lifted a finger telling me to wait, then disappeared inside. I could hear him rooting around in the shelves. When I peeked in, he was taking down a box of graham crackers. A kitchen raid? I couldn't help smiling. Guess it didn't matter whether it was a group home or summer camp, guys and their stomachs didn't change. Simon pulled out an unopened sleeve of crackers. The other one's already open, I whispered, pointing. Thanks, but he'll want the whole thing. Right, bro. I followed his gaze over my shoulder, and let out a yelp. The guy standing behind me had to be 6 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as the door. Though he was as big as an adult, he'd never be mistaken for one. His face could be used as the before picture for acne cream. Dark hair hung in his eyes, lank and dull. I swallowed. I didn't see you there. He reached past me and took the crackers from Simon. When he started to retreat, Simon grabbed the back of his shirt. We're still teaching him manners, he said to me. Derek, Chloe. Chloe, my brother, Derek. Brother. I said. Yeah. Derek's voice was a low rumble. Identical twins. He's my foster brother, Simon said. So I was just about to tell Chloe. We done here. Derek said. Simon waved him away, then rolled his eyes. Sorry. Anyway, I was just going to say welcome. Simon. Tori's voice echoed through the kitchen. Aha. I thought I heard you. Her fingers closed around the pantry door. You and Derek, always raiding the. She spotted me and her eyes narrowed. Tori. Simon said. Her expression flipped from simmering to simpering. Yes. He jabbed a finger toward the dining room door. SHHH. As she babbled apologies, I made my escape. After I finished the carrots, Mrs. Talbot said I could have free time until lunch and directed me to the media room. If I was hoping for a big screen TV with surround sound and a top-of-the-line computer, I was out of luck. There was a 20-inch TV, a cheap DVD/VCR combo, an old Xbox, and an even older computer. One flip through the movie collection and I knew I wouldn't be spending much time here, unless I was suddenly nostalgic for the Olsen twins. The only movie rated above PG was Jurassic Park, and it was labeled "Please ask before viewing," like I had to show my school ID card to prove I was over 13. I turned on the computer. It took 5 minutes to boot up. Windows 98. I spent another 5 minutes trying to remember how to use Windows. We had Macs at school and I'd used that as an excuse to finally persuade my dad to buy me an Apple laptop complete with all the upgraded movie editing programs. I searched for a browser. I hoped for Firefox, but wasn't getting anything better than plain old IE. I typed in a URL and held my breath, expecting to get a "cannot connect to the internet" message. Instead, the page popped up. Guess we weren't as cut off from the outside world as I'd feared. I flipped through my favorite sites, killing time until I worked up the nerve to check my inbox. A few minutes checking the weekend box office figures cleared my mind, then I typed in the URL to access my MSN account. The browser chugged away for a minute, then brought up a "page cannot be displayed" message. I tried Hotmail. Same thing. "Chloe, there you are." I turned as Mrs. Talbot walked in. I waved at the screen. I wanted to check my email, but I keep getting this. She walked over, glanced at the screen and sighed. It's that Net Nanny software or whatever they use. It does more than block some websites, I'm afraid. You can send and receive email through our account. You need to use the email program that came with the computer, and get Miss Van Dop to type in the password so you can send it. A pain, I know, but we had a problem last year with a young man accessing sites he shouldn't have, and when the board of directors found out, she shook her head. We're punishing everyone because of one bad apple, I'm sorry to say. Now, it's time for lunch. I met the last housemate, Peter, over lunch. He said hello, asked how things were going, then turned his attention to his PSP as he ate. Like everything else at Lyle House, it was all very normal. Too normal. Every time someone moved, I tensed, waiting for her to start speaking in tongues or screaming about bugs crawling over his plate. No one did. The food was decent enough. A homemade casserole, chock full of vegetables and meat. Healthy, I was sure, like the milk and whole wheat rolls we had to go with it. For dessert we'd been promised Jell-O. Oh joy! The sirens and screeching tires from Peter's game provided most of the meal's soundtrack. Ray was a no-show. Tori and Liz twittered together, too low for me to join in. Derek was too busy inhaling his food to talk. So it was left to Simon to play host. He asked what part of the city I was from. When I admitted I hadn't been in any neighborhood very long, he said they'd moved around a lot, to him and Derek. We started comparing worst move ever stories, and Tori jumped in with her own tale of moving horror from her upstairs bedroom to her basement. Simon let her ramble for about 2 minutes before asking what grade I was in and at what school. I knew he was just being polite, including the new girl in conversation, but if Tori had been a cartoon character, smoke would have billowed from her ears. I'd met girls like that. Territorial, whether it was about a hairbrush, a best friend, or a boy they had their eye on. Art school, she breathed. Isn't that just fascinating? Tell me, Chloe. What do you study there? Ghost photography? Ghost writing? I choked on a chunk of meat. Oh. Tori turned doe eyes on Simon. Didn't Chloe tell you why she's here? She sees dead people. Peter lifted his head from his game. Really? Cool. When I looked up, Derek's fork was stopped halfway to his mouth, green eyes piercing the curtain of hair as he stared at me, his lip curled, as if to say what kind of freak thinks she sees ghosts. It's not like that. I. There she goes. Tori sighed. Liz, slap her back. See if you can restart her. Simon glared at her. Stop being, Tori. She froze, mouth open, a still shot of humiliated horror. Derek returned to his lunch. I didn't mean it that way, Tori said, words tumbling out. Like Peter said, it's kinda cool. If she does see ghosts, maybe she could help Liz with her, you know, poltergeist. Tori. Liz shrieked, dropping her fork. Here we go, Derek grumbled. Liz's eyes filled as she screeched back her chair. Tori retreated into stumbling apologies again. Simon grabbed Liz's glass before she knocked it flying. Peter hunched over his game. Derek took advantage of the chaos to scoop up the last of the casserole. The kitchen door flew open and Mrs. Talbot appeared, but her words were beat back by the cacophony. Ray appeared in the other doorway holding a basket of dirty laundry. Last call, she mouthed. Any more? No one else noticed, much less heard her. I glanced around, and realized with all the commotion no one would notice if I left. So I did. They knew. Everyone knew. I was a freak. A crazy girl who saw ghosts. I belonged here. Lunch churned in my stomach. I hurried up the stairs, thinking of my bed with its thin mattress that smelled of chemical vanilla, suddenly so inviting. Pull the blinds down, curl up under the covers with my iPod, and try to forget. Can I help you, Chloe? 2 steps from the top, I stopped and turned to see Miss Van Dop below. I was just going to lie down for a minute. My head hurts and... Then come and get some Tylenol. I'm kind of tired. I don't have classes, so I thought. Come down, Chloe. She waited until I was almost there then said, at Lyle House, bedrooms are for sleeping. I know you're probably tired and feeling overwhelmed, but you need activity and interaction, not isolation. Ray's getting a head start on the laundry before afternoon classes. If you've finished lunch, you can go help her. I braced myself as I opened the basement door, expecting a descent down creaky wooden steps into a dark, damp basement, the kind of place I hated. Instead, I saw gleaming stairs, the passage brightly lit, the walls painted pale green with a flowery border. For the first time that day, I was glad of the too bright cheeriness. The laundry room had a tile floor, an old recliner, a washer and dryer, and a bunch of cupboards and shelves. 0 old basement creep factor. The washing machine was running, but there was no sign of Ray. I looked across the room, toward a closed door. As I walked to it, I picked up an acrid smell. Smoke? If Ray was smoking down here, I wasn't going to be the one to catch her. I turned to go back upstairs, and saw Ray squeezed between 2 towers of shelves. Her lips formed a silent oath as she shook her hand, putting out a match. I looked for a cigarette. There wasn't one, just the smoldering match. I heard Liz's voice again, "She has this thing for fire." My reaction must have shown because Ray jumped forward, getting between me and the door, hands flying up. No, it's not like that. I wasn't going to do anything. I don't. She slowed, seeing she had my attention. I don't start fires. They wouldn't let me stay here if I did. Ask anyone. I just like fire. Oh. She noticed me staring at the matchbook and pocketed it. I noticed you didn't get lunch, I said. Can I bring you something? Her face brightened. Thanks. But I'll grab an apple before class. I use any excuse to avoid eating with Queen Victoria. You saw what she's like. With me, it's food. If I take a big helping or seconds or dessert, she gets her jabs in. I must have looked confused, because she waved a hand down her body. Yes, I could stand to lose a few pounds, but I don't need her as my personal dietitian. She moved to a pile of unsorted laundry. My advice? Steer clear of her. She's like these monsters I saw in an old sci-fi film, vampires from space, only they didn't drink blood, they sucked out all your energy. Life force. Tobe Hooper. Psychic vampires. She grinned, showing a crooked canine. Psychic vampires. I'll have to remember that one. Earlier I'd thought I didn't belong here because I didn't feel crazy. I bet none of them did either. Maybe mental illness was like stuttering. I'd spent my life trying to convince people that just because I stammered didn't mean there was anything else wrong with me. I just had a problem that I was working hard to overcome. Like seeing people who weren't there. Like being attracted to fire. It didn't mean you were schizo or anything. The sooner I got over myself, the better off I'd be at Lyle House. The sooner I'd get better, and get out. I looked at the piles of laundry. Can I help? She showed me how, another thing I'd never done. Even at camp, someone did it for us. After a few minutes of working together, she said, "Does it make sense to you?" What? Putting a girl in a place like this because she likes fire. Well, if that's all. There's more, but it's small stuff, related to the fire thing. Nothing dangerous. I don't hurt myself or anyone else. She returned to her sorting. Do you like manga? She asked after a minute. Anime. Anime's cool. I'm not really into it, but I like Japanese movies, animated or not. Well, I'm into it. I watch the shows, read the books, chat on the boards, and all that. But this girl I know, she's completely into it. She spends most of her allowance on the books and DVDs. She can recite dialogue from them. She caught my gaze. So would you say she belongs here? No. Most kids are that way about something, right? With me, it's movies. Like knowing who directed a sci-fi movie made before I was born. But no one would say that makes you crazy. Just crazy about movies. Fascinated by them. Just like she took the matchbook from her pocket and waggled at me and fire. The door at the top of the stairs clicked. Girls? Mrs. Talbot called. Are you still down there? Her footsteps tapped down before we could answer. As her shadow rounded the corner, I snatched the matchbook from Ray's outstretched hand and hid it under the shirt I'd been folding. "Ray," Mrs. Talbot said. "Your classes are starting." "Chloe, I'll finish here, then come up." Mrs. Talbot left. I passed Ray back her matchbook and she mouthed her thanks, then followed the nurse up the stairs. And I was left alone in the basement. 7. I tossed a pair of pink underwear marked Liz into her pile, then stopped. Did we wash the guy's underwear, too? I really hoped not. I sifted through the pile, finding only ones for Ray, Liz, and Tori, and exhaled in relief. "Girl!" A man's voice over my head. I stiffened but forced myself to keep sorting. No one was here. Or, if someone was, he wasn't real. This was how I needed to handle it. Not jump like a scorched cat. Tough it out. Hear the voices, see the visions, and ignore them. "Come here." The voice had moved across the room. I lifted a red lace thong marked Tori and thought of my little girl cotton undies. "Over here." I tried to focus on how I could get better underwear before anyone else washed mine, but my hands started to tremble from the effort of ignoring the voice. Just one look. Just one. I glanced across the room. No one there. I sighed and returned to sorting. Door, closed. I looked at the closed door. The one I'd noticed earlier, which was proof that the voice was really just my overactive imagination. Why do you need proof? What else would it be? Great. 2 voices to ignore. Open the door, something, show you. Ha! Now there was a classic movie scene, just come look behind the closed door, little girl. I laughed, but the sound quavered, squeaking at the end. Get a grip. Toughen up or they'll never let you out. My gaze snuck to the door. It looked like an ordinary closet. If I really believed the voice was in my head, then what was stopping me from opening it? I strode to the door, forcing myself to put one foot in front of the other, knowing if I stopped, I'd lose my nerve. Good, come. I grasped the doorknob, the metal cold under my fingers. Open. I turned the handle slowly. It went a quarter turn, then stopped. I jiggled it. Locked. My voice echoed through the laundry room. I jangled it again, then twisted sharply. The door didn't budge. Key, find, unlock. I pressed my fingers to my temples. The door is locked and I'm going upstairs, I answered. As I turned, I smacked into a wall of solid flesh and for the second time that day gave a girly yelp. I looked up to see the same face that had made me shriek the last time. I stumbled back and would have fallen if the door wasn't right behind me. Derek made no move to catch me, just stood there, hands in his pockets as I recovered. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. "Myself." "Hey. Now, if you'll excuse me." When he didn't budge, I sidestepped to get around him. He moved into my path. "You saw a ghost, didn't you?" he said. To my relief, I managed to laugh. "Hate to break it to you, but there's no such thing as ghosts." "Hey." His gaze traveled around the laundry room, like a cop searching for an escaped convict. When he turned that piercing look on me, its intensity sucked the backbone out of me. What do you see, Chloe? I don't sss. Slow down. He snapped the words, impatient. What do they look like? Do they talk to you? You really want to know? Yet. I chewed my lip, then lifted onto my tiptoes. He bent to listen. They wear white sheets with big eye holes. And they say boo. I glowered up at him. Now get out of my way. I expected him to sneer. Cross his arms and say, make me, little girl. His lips twitched and I steeled myself, then I realized he was smiling. Laughing at me. He stepped aside. I swept past him to the stairs. Dr. Gill was a small woman with a long rodent nose and bulging rat-like eyes that studied me as if I were the rat one whose every twitch had to be scribbled into her notebook. I'd had therapists before. 2 of them, both after my mom died. I'd hated the first one, an old man with bad breath who'd closed his eyes when I talked, like he was taking a nap. When I complained, I got the second one, Dr. Anna, a woman with bright red hair who joked with me and reminded me of my mom and helped me get on with my life. After 10 minutes with Dr. Gill, I knew she fell somewhere in the middle. She seemed nice enough, and listened carefully, but she wasn't going to start cracking jokes anytime soon. We talked about how I'd slept, how I was eating, what I thought of the others, and, mostly, how I felt about being here. I lied about the last. I wasn't stupid. If I wanted to get out, I couldn't moan that I didn't belong or complain that someone made a horrible mistake. So I said that I knew my dad and aunt had done the right thing by putting me in Lyle House, and that I was determined to get better, whatever it took. Dr. Gill's rat face relaxed. That's a very mature attitude. I'm glad to hear it. I nodded, and tried to look sincere. Now, Chloe, have you ever heard of schizophrenia? My heart stopped. Schizophrenia. Yes. Do you know anything about it? My mouth opened and closed, brain refusing to fill it with words. Chloe. Why you think I'm schizo? Her mouth tightened. We don't use that word, Chloe. In fact, we prefer not to use labels at all. But a diagnosis is a necessary part of the process. A patient must know her condition, understand and accept it before we can begin treatment. But I just got here. How can you know already? Do you remember at the hospital? The doctors you spoke to? The tests they ran? They found schizophrenia. She shook her head. While scientists are working on a way to definitively diagnose schizophrenia, we don't have anything conclusive yet. Those tests, though, ruled out other possibilities, such as tumors or drug use. Taking those results and combining them with your symptoms, the most likely diagnosis is schizophrenia. I stared at the floor. You think I have schizophrenia? Do you know what it is? She spoke slowly, like she was starting to question my intelligence. I've seen A Beautiful Mind. More lip pursing. That's Hollywood's version, Chloe. But it's based on a true story, right? Based. Her voice softened. I know from your file that you enjoy movies, and that's wonderful. But they aren't a good place to learn about mental illness. There are many forms and degrees of schizophrenia, and yours isn't the same as that one. Wasn't it? I saw people who weren't there, just like the guy in the movie. Dr. Gill continued. What you are experiencing is what we'd call undifferentiated schizophrenia, meaning you're displaying a limited number of the primary symptoms in your case, seeing visions and hearing voices. Visual and auditory hallucinations. What about paranoia? We see no evidence of that. You show no signs of disorganized behavior or disorganized speech patterns. What about stuttering? She shook her head. That's unrelated. You display none of the other symptoms, Chloe. Will I? Eventually. Not necessarily. We'll have to be vigilant, of course, but we've caught this early. Usually a diagnosis isn't made until a patient is in her late teens or 20s. It's like catching a disease in its early stages, when we have the best chance to minimize its progression and get rid of it. A moment of silence as she fingered a long corded necklace. Schizophrenia is not like the flu, Chloe. It is permanent. Blood thundered in my ears, drowning out her next words. She leaned forward, touching my knee. Chloe, are you listening to me? I nodded. She moved back. Schizophrenia is not a life sentence. But it is a lifelong condition. Like having asthma. With lifestyle changes and medication, it can be controlled and you can lead an otherwise normal life, to the point where no one will realize you have it unless you choose to tell them. She leaned back, meeting my gaze. Earlier you said you were determined to do whatever it took to get through this. I know you were hoping for a quick fix, but this is going to require that same level of maturity and determination. Are you still prepared to do that, Chloe? I had more questions. Did it usually happen this fast, with no warning? One day you're walking around, totally normal, and the next you're hallucinating and running screaming through the halls? Then, bang, you get told you have schizophrenia, case closed? It all seemed too sudden. But when I looked at Dr. Gill, watching me expectantly, waiting to get on to the next phase, I was afraid if I said anything, it would sound like I was still in denial, and if I did that, I'd never get out of Lyle House. So I nodded. I just want to get better. Good. Then we'll begin. Dr. Gill explained about the medication. It was supposed to stop my hallucinations. Once they had the dose adjusted, there shouldn't be any significant side effects, but at first I might experience partial hallucinations, depression, and paranoia. Great. Sounded like the cure was as bad as the disease. Dr. Gill assured me that by the time I left the group home, taking the pills would be no different than taking daily asthma medicine. That's how you need to think of schizophrenia, Chloe. As a medical condition. You did nothing to cause it. And could do nothing to cure it. You'll go through a period of depression, anger, and even denial. That's natural, and we'll deal with that in our sessions. You'll meet with me for an hour a day. Are there group sessions, too? I asked. No. Someday you may decide you want to explore the dynamics of group therapy and we can discuss that later, but at Lyle House, we believe that privacy is critical. You need to fully accept your condition before you'll be comfortable sharing it with others. She laid her notebook on the desk and crossed her hands on her knee. And that leads to our final topic for today. Privacy. As I'm sure you've guessed, all the residents here are coping with mental issues. But that is all anyone needs to know. We will not share details of your condition, your symptoms, or your treatment with anyone here. If anyone pressures you for details, you are to come to us right away. They already know, I murmured. What? The outrage blazing from her eyes told me I should have kept my mouth shut. I knew from past therapy that it was important to share anything that was bothering me, but I didn't need to start my stay at Lyle House by tattling. And not about the schizophrenia. Just, someone knew about me seeing things. Ghosts. Which I never said. To anyone. Who was it? I'd rather not say. It was no big deal. She unfolded her hands. Yes, it is a big deal, Chloe. But I also appreciate that you don't want to get anyone into trouble. I have a good idea who it was. She must have been eavesdropping when we were discussing your hallucinations and jumped to her own conclusions about, a dismissive wave of her hands. Ghosts. I'm sorry this happened, but I promise it will be handled discreetly. But she won't know you told us anything, but it must be dealt with. She eased back into her seat. I'm sorry this happened on your first day. Young people are, by nature, curious, and as hard as we strive to provide privacy, it isn't always possible in such tight living quarters. It's okay. No one made a big deal of it. She nodded. We have a very good group of young people here. In general, they are very respectful and accepting. That's important at Lyle House. You have a difficult road ahead and we're all here to make that journey as smooth as possible. Schizo. It didn't matter how many times Dr. Gill compared it to a disease or physical disability, it wasn't the same thing. It just wasn't. I had schizophrenia. If I saw two guys on the sidewalk, one in a wheelchair and one talking to himself, which one would I rush to open a door for? And which would I cross the road to avoid? Dr. Gill said it was just a matter of taking my meds and learning to cope. If it was that easy, why were there people wandering the streets talking to themselves? Crazy-eyed homeless people shouting at thin air? Seeing people who weren't there. Hearing voices that didn't exist. Schizo. Just like me. After my session, I ducked into the media room to think. I was curled up on the love seat, hugging a pillow to my chest, when Simon sailed in. Not seeing me, he crossed the room and grabbed a baseball cap from the computer desk. Humming under his breath, he tossed the hat in the air and caught it. He looked happy. How could he be happy here? Comfortable, maybe. But happy? He flipped the cap over in his hand and tugged it on. He stopped, gaze fixed on the window. I couldn't see his expression, but he went very still. Then a sharp shake of his head. He turned and saw me. A flash of surprise, then a broad grin. Hey! Hi! He stepped closer, smile fading. You okay? I'm fine, sprang to my lips, but I couldn't force it out. I wasn't fine. I wanted to say I wasn't. I wanted it to be okay to say I wasn't. But the concern in his voice went no deeper than his grin, neither touching his eyes. They stayed distant, like he was making an effort to be nice because he was a nice guy and it was the right thing to do. "I'm fine," I said. He twisted the bill of his cap, watching me. Then he shrugged. "Okay. But a word of advice? Don't let them catch you holing up in here. It's like going to your room during the day. You'll get a lecture on moping around." "I'm not." He lifted his hands. "They're words, not mine. I'm just warning you. You can get away with turning on the TV and pretending you're watching it, but they'll be happier if you're up and about, hanging with us. We're not such a bad bunch. Not too crazy." He gave a blazing grin that made my stomach flip. I sat up, struggling for something to say, something to keep him here. I did want to talk. Not about Dr. Gill. Not about schizophrenia. About anything but that. Simon seemed normal and I desperately needed normal. But his gaze had already shunted to the door. Sure, he thought I should hang out with someone else. He was just giving advice to the new girl. The doorway darkened and Simon's smile flashed fresh. "Hey, bro. Don't worry. I didn't forget you. Just talking to Chloe." He waved my way. Derek looked in, so expressionless you'd think Simon was gesturing at the furniture. The scene in the basement flashed back, Derek accusing me of talking to ghosts. Had he told Simon? Probably. I bet they had a good laugh at the crazy girl. "We're heading out back," Simon said. "Kick around the ball for our break. You're welcome to join us." The invitation came lightly, automatically, and he didn't even wait for a response before he brushed past Derek with, "I'll get Talbot to disarm the door." Derek stayed where he was. Still watching me. Staring at me. Like I was a freak. Like I was schizo. "Take a picture," I snapped. "It'll last longer." He didn't so much as blink. Didn't leave either. Just kept studying me, as if I hadn't said a word. He'd leave when he was ready. And he did, walking out without a word. When I left the media room, only Mrs. Talbot was around. The other kids had returned to class after their break. She sent me into the kitchen to peel potatoes this time. Before I started, she gave me another pill. I wanted to ask when I could expect them to start working, but if I did, then I'd have to admit I was still hearing voices. I wasn't seeing anything, though. Just that hand this morning, right after I took the pills. So maybe they were working. Maybe it didn't get any better than this. What would I do then? Fake it. Block the voices and pretend I wasn't hearing them. Learn to. A scream echoed through the house. I jumped, the peeler clattering into the sink. As my heart thumped, I listened for a reaction. No reaction would mean the voice had been in my head. See, I was learning already. "Elizabeth Delaney. Get back here." A door slammed. Footsteps raced down the hall, punctuated by sobs. The hairs on my neck rose as I thought of the crying girl at school. But I forced myself to the door and cracked it open just in time to see Liz lurch up the stairs. "Enjoying the show?" I jumped and caught Tori's glower before she hurried after her friend. Miss Van Dop strode from the living room into the hall. "I have had it," the other voice boomed from the classroom. I expect some behavioral problems tutoring in a place like this, but that girl needs professional help. Ms. Wang, please, Miss Van Dop said. Not in front of. She threw a pencil at me. Whipped it. Like a weapon. Another half-inch and she'd have taken my eye out. She broke the skin. Blood. From a pencil. All because I dared to suggest that a 10th grade student should be able to understand basic algebra. Miss Van Dop tugged her into the hall, but the woman broke away and stormed into another room. Where's the director's number? I'm quitting. That girl is a menace. A shadow glided past me and I turned to see Derek at my shoulder. As the dining room door swung shut behind him, I caught a glimpse of books and a calculator spread across the table. He must have been there the whole time, doing independent work. As he looked down at me, I expected some sarcastic comment about eavesdropping, but he only muttered, "Welcome to the madhouse," then brushed past me into the kitchen to swipe an extra snack. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.